Good morning. I am Pastor Kyle, pastor of the Gate Church. Welcome to everybody visiting us via our YouTube channel. Man, we are continuing on in our Acts series. We're a little more than halfway through Acts. I'll be picking up in Acts chapter 14, starting at verse 8, reading down to verse 18, and it says, "Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul, looking intently at him and seeing that he had faith to be made well, said in a loud voice, 'Stand upright on your feet.' And he sprang up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, 'The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men.' Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was chief speaker. And the priests of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, yet he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness.' Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them." Amen, amen. Church, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of a really small play called Hamilton. I know it's a little grassroots and not many people know about it. I'm sure maybe a couple of you have seen it. But due to the success of Hamilton, theaters have seen an influx of new audiences who are buying tickets and attending various other productions. Now, this was pre-COVID. Now that we've had COVID, there's been a demand for access to watch other pre-recorded stage plays. The market for it has spiked. People from around the world are now becoming fans of these productions. I myself have always enjoyed the theater. I've always enjoyed anything around acting or music or movies. Pretty much anything that is artistic of nature I have interest in. I like to perform, I like to act. However, I've most recently, due to a few things, but I have some friends that are doing some back end stuff, putting on movies and different things. But anyway, I most recently have started to grow an appreciation for the technical side and aspects of art and production. And as I was thinking about this today, one of the most simple aspects I want to bring your attention to today is the spotlight. Yeah, the spotlight. Now, many of us know what a spotlight is, or at least understand the general function of one. However, you have probably never considered the importance of the spotlight. See, in theater, the spotlight in many ways leads the production because it demands and informs where the attention of the audience should be placed. Yeah, and it's built in such a way so that the actor or actress can be illuminated wherever they are. Yeah, and because of the spotlight, being such an integral part of a production, if it is not shining in the right place or on the right person, then what is supposed to be captured and understood and learned by the audience can often be lost. Therefore, the spotlight is vital to the success and execution of the life of a production. And I was thinking about this today for our church today. In a similar way, listen, us keeping the spotlight on Jesus is vital to the success of our lives. Yeah, us keeping the spotlight on our Lord and our King is vital to the success of our Christianity. And so, as we look in our text today, we will look at three concepts. The first one being this: how the world refuses to give Christ the spotlight. Number two, the danger in putting the spotlight on ourselves. And then lastly, we must put the spotlight where it belongs, on Christ our Lord. So let's look at our first point, how our world refuses to give the spotlight to him, to Christ. Picking up in verse 8, again, it says, "Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul, looking intently at him and seeing that he had faith to be made well, said in a loud voice, 'Stand upright on your feet.' And he sprang up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. Barnabas they called Zeus, Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Yeah, let me give you a little history on this city and the people within it. See, Lystra was a city in the region of Galatia. It was about 20 miles southwest of Iconium, which we talked about last week. And this city was a Roman province. Now, though it was a Roman province, its population was mainly of Greek descent. And we see this clearly observed in the response of the people to Paul and Barnabas healing this crippled man. See, after seeing this miracle, instead of them giving glory to the Lord, they attributed it to their Greek gods. Yeah, see, they were a polytheistic people. They believe in multiple gods, and not only multiple gods, but goddesses as well. And these multiple gods were led by their Olympian gods. It's actually where we get our world Olympics. Their Olympian gods or chief gods, and we see that a couple of them were identified here. It was 12 of them, but they identified two. We see that they called Barnabas Zeus. Zeus was considered the king of the gods and one with great power and authority. And then they called Paul Hermes. He was considered a clever god and a great messenger. Yeah, see, in our text, the people watched this amazing thing that had been done by their hands, and they refused to give credit and glory to the one true God. But here's the thing, church. We see this same mindset all throughout our world. Yeah, there are miracles happening every single day around us. I mean, in hospitals, people being healed, cured, bodies being restored, people in comas being written off for dead, yet they have awakened. It actually reminds me, I met a man in my old job who had, he told me this story. He had this thing around his neck, and we're having this conversation. I had noticed this little thing around his neck, but anyway, we were having a conversation. He said, man, I used to be a police officer. I'm like, oh, really? And he said, yeah. He said, one day, I was on my route, on my shift, and he said, I saw a car parked in the middle of the street. And he said, I walked up to that car, and I noticed it was a man and woman, a husband and wife, arguing. And he said they were going back and forth, and she hopped out of the car, and they were going back and forth. And so I was trying to pull her away from what was going on. I don't know if they were fighting or what. But he said, and the husband grabbed my arm and slammed on the gas. And he said he dragged me for about 4 or 5 blocks and ran into a wall. And he said that's the last thing that I remember. And he went on to tell me how the hospital he was in a coma for almost a year. And he went on to tell me how the hospital had told his family that he would probably, even if he survived, they would probably be in a vegetative state and that most likely he may never wake up. And so they were trying to push his family to pull the plug on him. And here's the thing. After about a year, he said, at some point, I think around October, he said he just woke up. He woke up. Though they had written him off for dead, this miracle happened where he woke up out of his coma after almost a year. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, man, I am here talking to a living and breathing miracle. Now, see, our culture would say that man was lucky. Yeah. See, our culture today, when good things happen, they say, oh, that's just positive vibes or positive energy. See, when a doctor performs a life-saving surgery, the glory is given to the intellect of men. Yeah, when medicines are able to heal us from within, we give acknowledgement to science. But church, humanity and our world is aiming their spotlight in the wrong place. Yeah, they're aiming the spotlight on the wrong person. Yeah, the doctor and the chemist and the teacher and the painter, even the great athlete who wins the championship, they are indeed participants. However, God is the Lin-Manuel of this wonderful musical called life. Now, I say Lin-Manuel because our God is the writer, He is the producer, and He is the star of the show. Yeah, and the spotlight, it belongs to Him and Him alone. Which actually leads me to my next point. The danger in putting the spotlight on ourselves. Picking up at verse 13 to 15a, it says this. And the priests of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, men, why do you do these things? we also are men of like nature with you. Man, what we see here should not blow my mind. However, I have to admit it does. Just sitting here reading and watching the humility displayed by these brothers is so encouraging to me. Because after Paul and Barnabas preach in the city and they heal this man, after they go back to the hotel or the Airbnb, because that must have been where they went off somewhere, because it says that they don't know what's going on. See, what happens here after they do this miracle is that the text describes this excitement and awe that began to grow in the city. Yeah, the fame of these two men grew like a wildfire. And as soon as Paul and Barnabas catch wind of what the people were doing and saying, and how they were not only glorifying Zeus and Hermes, but it says they had moved to a place of glorifying them as their gods incarnate. Man, they moved to a place where they actually started to glorify Paul and Barnabas. Yeah, and so when they hear about this, Paul and Barnabas come running to stop them. Church, maybe you don't understand the implications here, but this is not people lining up for an autograph like what we see today. Now, listen, the closest thing that I can give you as an example that I've experienced in my life was Michael Jackson. I remember when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I was watching, there was this big tour that Michael Jackson was doing overseas, and I remember they said that it was all these people. It was at the concert. It was like on HBO. They showed a pan of it was people lined up, and they were all out for this concert. For miles and miles, and they were just waiting on Michael Jackson to come out. And Michael Jackson, all of a sudden, with this explosion, pops out of the bottom of the stage and just lands, and he stood like this. And those people started screaming. They started waving their hands towards him as if they were reaching out to grab him and to embrace him. The grown men and women were crying. They were yelling Michael and just saying his name. People were passing out and they were picking him up and carrying him off. He hadn't even started performing yet. You had spent all that money for that ticket and you'd have passed out. Literally, they were screaming and crying out. Now, this isn't a knock to Michael or even those people, but I'm just trying to wrap my mind around that was the closest thing I had ever seen to people worshiping a person. Now, I used to travel and perform. Many of you know I used to do music. I used to travel and perform with my friends, and I've experienced a small level of large groups, lining up to get autographs and take pictures and things like that. And I'll have to admit, it is flattering, right? It makes you feel pretty cool. But we aren't talking about a photo being taken or a little ink being written on a poster. No, the text says that the people in Lystra they got dressed up, and then they started bringing out animals, their priests of these pagan gods, and they started to sacrifice them in honor to Paul and Barnabas. Church, what we're seeing here in the text is beyond flattery. No, what we see in the text is actually worship. And why I'm so blown away is because in our culture today, we don't have a category for this. Who walks away from praise in our culture today? And not just walk away. In the text, it says that they rebuke them. Yeah, they rebuke those who are giving them this adoration. What we see here is something that in our culture, we live in a culture and in a time where it's all about the exaltation of our own accomplishments. Yeah, we live in a place and in a time where I want to be acknowledged for what I have achieved or what I have accomplished. Matter of fact, we get offended if somebody doesn't acknowledge our achievement or what we accomplish. Now, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with working hard. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be recognized for your work. However, church, hear this. Whenever our hearts become attached to the glory of our own name, that's a problem. Yeah, when we have an expectation, when our identity is laced and is put into these things. See, church, in American culture, celebrity and power are heralded as the apex of life achievement. Most of us will never be famous. Most of us will probably never have a lot of power and hold some political office. Now, some of y'all will, but most of us probably will not. However, I'm still speaking to everyone under the sound of my voice, whether you are on your job or whether you're at school or whether you're out in your community. If we begin as believers to point people to ourselves, and even unbelievers as well, if we begin to point people to ourselves as the catalyst for any accomplishment or greatness or even good, we have now entered into a dangerous place. Yeah. Because what has happened is we become guilty and complicit in the idolatry of anyone who chooses to look to you instead of God. Did you hear what I said? We become guilty and complicit in the idolatry of anyone who chooses to look for you for their hope, for their salvation, right? For their love, joy, and contentment instead of God. Yeah, see, Paul and Barnabas had the correct reaction. They were outraged. It did not sit right in their spirit, and they did not sit there passively and just say, oh, you know what, it's harmless. They didn't say, oh, they just don't know. I'll leave them alone. They just don't know any better. No, it troubled them. In church, they refused to put the spotlight on themselves. Yeah, they said, listen, we are just men like you. Yeah, we are just tools in the hand of someone who is greater than us, who's mightier than us. One who can't be, who me and Barnabas, no one who we can't even hold a candle to. Church, they not only refused the spotlight, but actually what we see in the text is that they repositioned it. Yeah, not only did they refuse the spotlight, telling them, no, you got your eyes set in the wrong place. No, they repositioned it rightfully where it belongs, which is actually our last point. Picking up in verse 15, it says this, men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news, that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them. Church, Barnabas and Paul told the crowd to turn from these vain things. The Greek word here is mateos, which means useless, empty, futile, and leading to nothing. Church, it says that they pleaded with them, Barnabas and Paul. Out of a measure of love, they pleaded with them, saying, you have invested your time and your lives into something that cannot fulfill you or save you. And church, in the same way, we as believers, we should lift up our voices, lovingly telling our world to turn from the vain things that they have spent their time putting their hope and their identity and their salvation in. Yeah, those things may be real, those things may even be good, but trying to find your hope in them is futile. Because listen, science is great, but it can't save you. Doctors and medicine can only do so much. All the earthly power that we gain here is limited. Celebrity, it fades and it will never be enough. Church, we as God's ambassadors, we have to lovingly tell the world to turn away. But when we tell them to turn away, we must give them something to turn to. Yeah, because what I see in the text is that Paul and Barnabas did exactly that. Yeah, they did exactly what a spotlight is supposed to do. They begin to bring attention and light to the majesty and the beauty of he who was already there. Do you hear what I'm saying? When a spotlight is shining on the wrong person, the right person is actually standing right in front of you. You have just got your attention in the wrong place. Yeah, Paul and Barnabas bring their attention and light to the majesty and beauty of he who is already there. Yeah, these two men take a moment to just brag on their Lord. Man, do you see that in the text? Yeah, they explained that the miracle was just a small fraction of the phenomenal things their God had already been doing. He didn't just talk about who God was. They said not only is God this, but you've already been taking benefit and enjoying his goodness and his majesty. And how they were already beneficiaries of his amazing work. See, church, we as believers need to spend more time bragging on our God. Yeah, this is the only case, or only place in the Bible where I believe we can have the license to brag. Yeah, because most of us are pretty good at bragging about things about ourselves, like our grades or our talents or our accomplishments. Some of y'all like to brag on y'all kids and y'all kids' accomplishments. Now, here's the thing. I was thinking about this week. If we can not have, listen, if we have no embarrassment at all, bragging on those little beautiful yet strange pictures that our kids draw for us, we'll show them to anybody, highlight, put the spotlight on it all the time. If we can do that without embarrassment or hindrance or fear or angst, right? Then for sure we can spend a little time bragging on Jesus, can we not? See, church, God has more for us to speak about and to brag on than anything or anyone. Yeah, see, here's the thing, church. Our God is the Alpha and Omega. He is the first and the last. He is the beginning and He is the end. He is the great builder of all creation and He is the sustainer of it. He is eternal. He's outside of space and time, yet He upholds it all by His very essence. He is, He was, and He will forever be. There is none like Him. Beloved, life only exists because of the eternal breath that flows from Him. Yeah, and all humanity is just a picture. It is just a reflection of His creative glory. And though there is sin in this world, His righteousness remains. It can never be thwarted and it can never be consumed. See, our God is a promise keeper. That means His word stands, it holds true, and it will always come to pass. He is Jehovah Rapha. That means He is our healer. He is the great physician, not only of these bodies, but also our souls. He is a restorer. He is our redeemer. He is a keeper and He is a protector. His death was just the exemplification of love, and His resurrection is the trumpet of His glory. Yeah, He has no losses. Our God has no ties. He only knows victory. Church, there is none like Him. Yeah, the greatest minds of our world cannot completely comprehend Him, yet even a child can fully embrace the revelation of His gospel message. Yeah, see, He is the King of kings. He is the Lord of lords. He is the Lion of Judah, and He is the Rock of ages. He is good. He is faithful. He is merciful, and His grace abounds richly. Yeah, He's not just loving. No, He is the reason. He is the source of all love. Church, He is our God. He is your God, and no one and nothing compares to Him. Man, enjoy your Sunday.